We are going to delve into book Contrasts, written in 1836 by Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin, a man who started off the Gothic revival movement and had a major impact on architectural history. Pugin, a devout Catholic and visionary architect, is often credited for his role in the design of the British Parliament building and Big Ben clock tower in London. His seminal book, Contrasts, is more than a critique of the architecture of his time. It's a passionate manifesto that calls for a return to the moral and spiritual principles embodied in medieval Gothic architecture. Augustus Pugin was born into an artistic family in 1812. His father, an architectural draftsman, introduced him to the world of design at an early age. This early exposure, combined with Pugin's deep-seated Catholic faith, profoundly shaped his architectural philosophy. He believed architecture should be a reflection of society's moral and spiritual values, and for him, the Gothic style was the epitome of this ideal. In Contrasts, Pugin compares the architecture and societal values of the medieval period with those of the 19th century. He argues that the decline in architectural quality mirrors a broader moral and spiritual decay. When he first published Contrasts, Christian art was scarcely understood, and Pugin stood almost alone in his advocacy. He starts the preface with admitting to some initial misunderstandings, particularly in attributing the decline of Gothic architecture solely to Protestantism, and recognizes that a broader decay of faith across Europe led to a revival of classical, or as he called it, pagan principles in art and architecture. Pugin emphasizes that true Christian or Gothic architecture is a reflection of the Catholic faith, embodying its doctrines and values. He begins by contrasting the architectural works of the period between the Renaissance and 19th century with those of the Middle Ages. Pugin highlights the superiority of medieval architecture, emphasizing that its beauty lies in its fitness for purpose and its symbolic representation of Christian beliefs. Every detail in Gothic architecture, according to Pugin, had a mystical import, reflecting the religious and cultural values of the time. In contrast, 19th century architecture had lost this connection to spirituality and purpose, becoming mere decoration, devoid of deeper meaning. Pugin criticizes the revival of pagan principles in the architecture of his time, which he sees as a betrayal of Christian values. The Catholics of the 19th century, he argues, have adopted profane symbols of paganism, resulting in the degradation of sacred spaces. The mystical and symbolic elements of Gothic architecture have been replaced by classical forms that do not embody the spiritual truths of Christianity. This trend, he believes, is part of a broader cultural decline, where art and architecture no longer serve to uplift the soul but cater to materialistic and superficial tastes. The destructive impact of the Reformation on English religious architecture is another critical focus of Pugin's work. He recounts how Henry VIII's break with the Catholic Church led to the dissolution of monasteries and the plundering of church properties. This period, according to Pugin, was a time of great moral and cultural decline, symbolized by the destruction of sacred buildings. The Protestant emphasis on simplicity and functionality in worship spaces further eroded the rich symbolic and artistic traditions of the Catholic Church. This narrative continues with the reign of Edward VI and the establishment of Protestantism as the state religion. Church interiors were stripped of their decorations, altars were demolished, and stained glass windows were smashed. The new Protestant worship practices were incompatible with the grandeur and complexity of medieval churches, leading to further alterations and mutilations of these sacred spaces. Pugin mourns this loss of the artistic and spiritual richness that once characterized English churches. Pugin also laments the current state of old ecclesiastical buildings, which have suffered from centuries of neglect, ill-conceived repairs, and inappropriate modifications. He criticizes the utilitarian approach of 19th century church authorities, who prioritized comfort and convenience over the preservation of historical and artistic integrity. The true purpose of a church, Pugin argues, is to inspire reverence and awe, qualities that are lost in 19th century adaptations. He calls for a return to the principles of medieval architecture, where every element of the building serves to elevate the worship experience. In reflecting on how English churches might have fared if the country had remained Catholic, Pugin acknowledges that even under Catholic rule, the influence of pagan ideas might have crept in. However, he believes the core principles of Gothic architecture would have been preserved. He contrasts the ruins of English monasteries, which he views with reverence, to the degenerate state of some continental churches marred by inappropriate restorations. Protestant neglect of church buildings has, in some ways, preserved their original features better than misguided Catholic restorations. Contrasts is not just a critique of 19th century classical architectural practices, it's a passionate defense of a philosophy that sees architecture as a reflection of society's moral and spiritual values. Pugin's arguments influenced the Gothic revival movement, leading to a renewed interest in medieval architecture and its principles. His work laid the groundwork for subsequent architects who sought to revive the grandeur and spirituality of Gothic architecture in their designs of everyday buildings beyond just churches. Pugin's emphasis on the symbolic and mystical aspects of architecture continues to resonate, reminding us of the profound connections between art, faith, and culture. In conclusion, Augustus Pugin's Contrasts remains a powerful and influential critique of classical architecture, and started the Gothic revival movement, which was very influential in the late 19th century and still beloved by many people today. By highlighting the symbolic and spiritual richness of Gothic architecture, Pugin advocated for a vision of architecture that goes beyond mere aesthetics to embody the moral and spiritual values of society. His work is a testament to the enduring power of architecture to inspire, uplift, and reflect the deepest beliefs of a culture. Contrasts continues to be a seminal text for anyone interested in the history of architecture, the Gothic revival, and the intersection of art and faith.